Today on behalf of the MSA, I would like to say hello. My name is Ali Abedi. I'm the president of the Muslim Students Association, and if you guys who aren't familiar, who are just maybe walking in, today we are having an event entitled Islamophobia, what America should know about Islam and Muslims. And today we are honored to have Brother Hanif Mohammed with us to deliver this lecture. Brother Hanif converted to Islam 20 years ago while he was in college. He is an accountant by profession and began his advanced Islamic seminary education in 2002. In 2008, he completed his first level of advanced Islamic studies and was certified as an Islamic preacher at that time. He is currently studying the second level of Islamic studies. Brother or Sheikh Hanif Mohammed has lectured in many cities and universities throughout America, one of which being the University of Dearborn, on a variety of different subjects. It is his main objective to explain the religion of Islam to non-Muslims to remove any misconceptions or bad information that has been reported about Islam and Muslims. Towards this endeavor, he has created a non-profit organization entitled Inviting to the Straight Path. He hopes that this will be a resource for Muslims and non-Muslims alike to gather good, sound materials to learn about and educate themselves about Islam. Brother Hanif is a friend to the MSA and has been used as an advisor in a multitude of different issues. So I would like to introduce and present others to this man that is very close to me, Sheikh Hanif Mohammed, with a loud round of applause.
Before I begin, it's customary for us as Muslims to begin any type of event with the recitation of the Quran. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have one of the members of the MSA to come and recite the opening chapter of the Quran. Thank you very much.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. In the Arabic language, we will say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I'd like to do right now is I'd like to thank the brother for reciting the beautiful verses of the Quran. And for those of you, as I look across the audience, I don't think that the majority of the people really knew what it was that he said. So I'd like to give you a loose translation of that chapter, which is the opening chapter of the Quran, and what it means in English. We begin by saying that we seek protection in God Almighty, who created us all, from the accursed Satan, who was rejected. Why is Satan rejected? He's rejected because he decided that he didn't want to follow the laws that God had given to him. In the name of God, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Most gracious, most merciful. King of the day of judgment. Thee alone do we worship, and Thee alone do we ask for help. We ask you that you guide us on your straight path, the path of those who have earned your favor, and not the path of those who have earned your anger, of those who have gone astray. And you have to forgive me sometimes. I want to put the best words in explaining that, because sometimes when we give certain words, they don't translate the best way. So today, it is my pleasure to stand before you. And I begin in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. And all praises are due to God, the Lord of the worlds. And I ask that His salutations and His peace and His blessings be upon all of His messengers, from our prophet Adam all the way to the last of His prophets, Muhammad, and that His salutations also be upon the purified family of the prophet and his righteous companions. Why do we ask for these blessings to be on these people? Because they are the ones who gives us the best examples of how it is to live as Muslims, to live as good human beings. I would like to thank the MSA and the officers of the MSA for inviting me here today. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here. The title of this event is Islamophobia: What America Should Know About Islam and Muslims. But this title could have easily been, or some may say it should have been, Islamophobia. What American Muslims want their fellow Americans to know about themselves and the religion that they have chosen for themselves. Before I get into the lecture, what I like to do is, I like to do a little game, a word association game. Everyone knows this game of word association. Someone gives you a word, and then you blurt out the first thing that comes to your mind. Very easy. So there are no wrong answers here. But what I want to do is I want to condition your minds for certain things. So let's do a test. Sink.
Water.
Good. So you know the game. So believe you me, when I give you a word, just blurt out whatever it is that you have in your mind, and whatever the most popular answer is, we're going to take that answer and we're going to use that. So the first word that I would like to use is America. We have freedom, we have liberty.
Opportunity.
Okay. Very good. School.
Education.
Opportunity. Equality.
For all.
God. Faith. Muslims. Islam. I'm surprised. I am truly surprised. Because normally when I give this word Islam and Muslims, I wish that the camera was turned around and we could film you, show you what your faces look like, and then turn it back so that we could discuss it. But as soon as I said Muslims, most people, what was the first thing in your mind?
Terrorists.
Terrorists. Islam, most people would say Muslims. But Muslims, the first thing that happens to most people is they go into their minds and they say terrorists. Has this always been the way that Americans have felt about Muslims and Islam? In many of our lifetimes we know that Muslims were not looked at as the enemy. But many people in America, they have no idea of the rich history that Muslims and Islam has in this country. So today what I like to do is I like to talk about some of those things that don't come up in your history books, that are actually historical events and historical facts about America. If we go back to when America first became an independent nation, when we gained our independence from England, there were many countries that refused to accept America as an independent nation. Even though the Americans had won the Revolutionary War and had declared their independence, the very first nation to accept America as an independent nation was the nation of Morocco. Morocco was an Islamic country then, and it is an Islamic country today. That lets us know what? Muslims have always had respect for this country called America. Our founding fathers were very familiar with Islam and with who they considered the founder, and with its religious book, the Holy Quran. In an article that was written in the Library of Congress Bulletin entitled "The Founding Fathers in Islam," library people show early tolerance for the Muslim faith. This article was written by a man by the name of James Hudson. And for those of you that are interested in getting the website and the resource material that I use for this, I'll be glad to give it to you after the lecture, God willing. He says that Jefferson, in his autobiography, recounted with satisfaction that in the struggle to pass his landmark bill for establishing religious freedom, the Virginia legislature rejected it by a great majority. Why? Because they wanted to limit the scope of what religious freedom meant. They didn't want the protection to extend to the Gentile, the Christian, and the Mohammedan. What did the people back in those days call Muslims? They called us Mohammedans or Mohammedans. Why? Because they said if Jesus Christ is the founder of Christianity and his followers are called Christians, if Buddha was the founder of Buddhism and they called their followers Buddhists, then Muhammad, we feel, is the founder of Islam or his religion, so we're going to call them Mohammedans or Mohammedans, as they called it at that day. But not only that, but George Washington, he wanted to give Muslims relief that were living in Virginia, the same state that Jefferson was living in. Why? Because the state of Virginia decided to pass a law that would taxate everybody, even if you were a non-Christian, to give to the church so the church would be able to thrive. George Washington himself said, if the Mohammedans would be good workers, I will invite them to come to Mount Vernon to live and work here. That becomes something very important because our first president is talking about people getting taxed. So that means that most of us, when we think about Islam in America, what do we think of first as far as the people? We think about slaves. Because they said at least 2 out of every 5 slaves that came to this country was a Muslim. But here, slaves didn't pay taxes. So these were free men living in this country that our founding fathers was trying to protect their rights through that Constitution. We find that in Massachusetts, that their Constitution in that great state said that they wanted to afford liberty to deists, Mohammedans, Jews, and Christians. And to that point, Justice Theophilus Persons, he resounded this, he affirmed this position in 1810. What we have here is that our founding fathers understood that when they were framing this Constitution, we don't learn what I just told you in our history books. They're not telling you that they wanted to include Mohammedans or Jews or anyone else for that matter. But it is a matter of historical fact. Speaking of that great Constitution, that great document, there were 2 men that were looked at the primary framers of this Constitution: Jefferson and Adams. It's coincidental that both of these men had in their possessions a copy of the Quran, and they read that Quran. So they were familiar with this book. And because they were familiar with the book and the religion, one of the first treaties that was signed by America with a country outside of itself was the Treaty of Tripoli. We hear in the Marines' theme song, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. How many people, I don't want to see Muslims' hands go up, how many people know what Tripoli is? Where's Tripoli, man?
Algeria.
Close. Yes, same place. Tripoli is actually Morocco, Algeria, the Horn of Africa. Up in that direction. Yes.
Right here.
Yes. Thank you very much. Now, that treaty was signed with Muslims. John Adams had an understanding of what Islam was. Now, to understand an Islamic state, you know that Islam does not do treaties with people that they call infidels. Now, what is an infidel? We're going to see this word again, not from the Muslim point of view, but we're going to see it when our forefathers was trying to bring this constitution into being. They used the word infidel, which meant that a person was an atheist. They had no belief in God. That's what it meant. It didn't mean that people were anti-Islamic, anti-Christian. They just didn't believe in God. But in order for this Muslim country to enter into this contract, into this treaty with them, they couldn't deal with people that were non-believers. So when John Adams, who was our president at the time, went in to negotiate this treaty, he had an understanding of the Quran, and he knew that the Quran referred to the Christians, and in America, they said was a Christian nation, as Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, the people that had a revealed book, a revelation from God Almighty. Because he had this knowledge, that treaty was able to go through. Thomas Jefferson, it is reported that when he was writing this Religious Freedom Act, that he was actually trying to learn Arabic so that he would be able to read the Quran and get a better understanding of it. But when he wrote this bill, he said that he wanted it to protect the Jew, the Gentile, the Christians, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, and the infidel of every denomination. He used that word infidel. Again, to show that there's a difference. They believed that the Hindu had a belief system. And that belief system had to be protected. Even if you wanted the right not to be able to have a religion, that they protected that also. So the first thing that I want America to know is that Muslims have a very long and glorious history here in America that exceeds that goes even further back than those of our European counterparts. But we didn't come to talk about that today. That's another lecture. And God willing, if I'm invited back, we will talk about that. Speaking of the Quran also, we find that there were Qurans in the libraries here in America as early as 1683. That the citizens of Massachusetts were reading the Quran on a regular basis from the time that they came to these shores. These are things that we don't find in the history books. So what is it that we as Muslims want you to know? That here in America, that our book, that our religion, and that our prophet were known and respected here. How do we know that our prophet Muhammad was respected here? Because in recent years, throughout the world, even some incidents here in America, people have depicted and drawn pictures of our prophet Muhammad as being a pedophile, as being a warmonger, as being someone that's unruly and not a very good person. We as Muslims, we would never depict someone that is a messenger of God, nor anyone that we would look at to say that he's a good person. We would never depict this person in that type of a way, because our book and the life of our prophet dictates that we don't do things like that. We have to hold people in the highest esteem. But was the prophet looked at in this way by everybody in America? No. How do we know that? Has anyone in here ever gone to the Supreme Court building in Washington? 2 people. When you walk into this building, the building is beautiful. The floors are marble. They have beautiful statues. when you walk into the Supreme Court chambers, what you find is that if you look in here, you find the seats for all the justices. There's a table, but along this wall is what they call a frieze. And along this wall is what they call a frieze. What is a frieze? A frieze is a decorative panel. And on this decorative panel, what they did was they put 18 lawgivers of the world. There and there. If you're in the Supreme Court building and you're sitting where you are, if you looked up to your left and counted from the right side backwards, the second person from the end is Muhammad. Why did they put him there? They put him there because they said not only was he a lawgiver, but he was a bringer of peace. He was a bringer of justice. He was a bringer of equality. Our judicial system, the highest court in our land, understood that our prophet was not what they're trying to depict him as today. So I have a question for all of you. When and how did the terms Islam and Muslim become synonymous with the terms terror and terrorism? 9/11. Amen. But it's so much more that we have to get to before we get to 9/11.
Could it not have been also started during the 1948 war against Israel, with the Islam nations attacking, the Muslim nations attacking Israel, and the Yom Kippur War?
And definitely we will get to that. But the sentiment in America was, especially at that time, America said what happens in those places, happens in those places. The average American, it was not an issue for him to worry about what was going on 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles away. But you guys are right, it was 9/11. But I would be remiss today if I didn't talk about the events that came before 9/11, the century before then, the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, we can make an argument like you did about how the Muslim nations attacked the Israeli nations. Now see, for me, that's a very subjective view. We look at that thing from the way that it's been given to us. Because the Muslims didn't go into Israel and say we're going to cut out a piece of land and make it our home, and the people that live there, we're going to put them off. It was the opposite. And in that treaty that happened in 1948, they were only supposed to get a certain amount of land, but before that ink dried on that treaty, they were destroying people, killing them, and bulldozing them out of their places. So we won't get into that because this isn't that type of discussion right now, but we could discuss that later, God willing. But what we find is in the 1900s, there were Muslims living in this country. Up until 1960, there may have only been 20 masjids or Islamic places of worship here. But in 1930, in Detroit, Michigan, there was a man by the name of Wallace Fard Muhammad. Now, for those that are historians and that have gone back and looked at certain things, you'll find that this man has a lot of aliases. So what we'll do is, to put his character and make sure that it's correct, we'll call him Fard Muhammad. And he was a Muslim brother from the East, and he moved over here and he established or founded a group called the Nation of Islam. He had a student by the name of Elijah Poole. That's from about an hour and 45 minutes from here in Sandersville, Georgia. Elijah Poole later on became Elijah Muhammad. Fard Muhammad left, and Elijah Muhammad had taken the reins of this organization called the Nation of Islam. Today, this is February. In this country, we celebrate what in February? Black History Month. In Black History Month, this man, Elijah Muhammad, is not discussed. Why? Many a Muslim, when I say the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, they take exception with me because they say, why would you call this man honorable? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you away from this man's name, and I'm going to give you some history, and as I'm giving you history, I'm going to ask you questions. If I told you that there was a man who went into the worst ghettos in the country, and he began to speak to the destitute members of those ghettos, he was talking to these people who had fallen into despair and gave them a message of hope that changed their life around, what would you call this man? If I told you that this man not only gave these people a message, but he set up programs to stop their alcoholism and to get them off of drugs, what would you call this man? If I told you that this man went in and saw this group of people that didn't have any confidence in themselves, and this group of people that were told for year after year after year that they were the worst of all creation, that this man went and told them that you have to be a man, don't have babies and leave them there, be responsible, what would you call this man? If the same man that taught these men how to be men actually taught these men how to teach other men how to be responsible men, what would you call this man? If this man decided to say, I want to empower these people economically, because unemployment amongst minorities in this country, it just didn't start being that it was a higher rate of unemployment now. Throughout the history of America, and I love to digress, so please bear with me. When I went to college, and I'm looking at all of you beautiful people in college, there was a show called Phil Donahue. Any of you ever heard of Phil Donahue? Okay, so I'm not by myself. I feel good. Phil Donahue had two different people on the show. He had the Grand Master of the Ku Klux Klan on the show, and he had the mayor of St. Louis. And the mayor of St. Louis and the Grand Master of the Ku Klux Klan began to have words between each other. And the Grand Master said to the mayor of St. Louis, he said, listen, you people, you don't want to work, you lazy, and your unemployment rates are high because you don't want to do anything. My brother, he said something that has stuck with me from that time until now. And this has been 20 years. The brother said, lazy, it was upon our backs that built this country into the powerhouse it was. But in the days of slavery, there was no such thing as black unemployment. Everybody had a job. So, here when we look at this type of a situation, when we look at this man, like I said he wanted to go into these neighborhoods where people weren't hiring anybody, that didn't have any industry. He said, I want to empower you economically. So this man, he showed these people how to make bean pies. He went to the farmers and he bought fruit wholesale. He went and taught people how to make soup. With his little means, he made a newspaper. And what did he do with these small means? He gave these people jobs so that they were able, for the first time, to take care of their families. If a man does that, what do you call him? The same man, he becomes a businessman. His businesses grow. Not only is he dealing with farmers in this country, but he started a fish company called the Shabazz Fish Company. And they were importing tons of fish into the United States from Japan and then later on Peru. And he put thousands of people to work. Do we need somebody like that today? How are they creating jobs? He created jobs for people who didn't have any way of getting jobs. What do you call this man? I don't know about any of you, but I call him honorable. Now there are people who stand up and they say, oh, he did not teach Islam. My brother Malcolm X, and I'll be talking about him in a little while. For those of you who are familiar with me, you know I love Malcolm. It's my big brother. But Malcolm X was on a radio program, and during the radio program, the person that was interviewing him, he said, "Brother Minister, there are many Arab Americans, Muslims, who say that Elijah Muhammad is not a Muslim." My brother Malcolm, he sat back and he said, "Brother, I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Because I don't see how it is that any Muslim will say to another Muslim that he is not a Muslim." And then our brother Malcolm, with that certainty, with that confidence that he had, he said, "I really don't care if they don't accept him as a Muslim anyway." Why? Because Malcolm said, and I'm quoting Malcolm, he said that it was through Elijah Muhammad that the words Allah, Quran, Islam, and Muhammad became a part of the American vernacular. He said that there were Muslims here in this country, and we could trace them back all the way to what we were talking about before 1683 and even before then. But what did the Muslims do? They came into the melting pot, but they weren't telling people that we're Muslims. They weren't telling people that this is Islam. They weren't propagating the religion. So Malcolm X said, look, if they don't want to do that, it's okay. But they shouldn't be the ones who say that Elijah Muhammad is not a Muslim. Why does that become important? Because in 1938, Elijah Muhammad had a book called How to Pray Salah. Everything that we do in Salah, he had it there. Elijah Muhammad made Hajj more than once. So I say to people now, and I say to my Muslim brothers and sisters that are out here right now, any of our dirty laundry, keep it in the house. We shouldn't accuse one group of people against another group of people. But I'm going to move away from Elijah Muhammad, because by the time Elijah Muhammad died in 1975, and you know many people said at one time that the Nation of Islam was the most militant group and the most dangerous group in America. But even with their danger, people saying that they were dangerous, were the people of the Nation of Islam ever called terrorists or known for terrorist activities? No. In 1975, when Elijah Muhammad died, Americans still didn't look at Muslims as terrorists. We move on to Malcolm X. And Malcolm X, in the last century, he was voted as one of the most influential men of the century. His book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, was voted one of the top 10 most influential books of the century. Malcolm X is more known outside of these borders than he is inside of these borders. 29 countries celebrate a Malcolm X Day. Why? Because Malcolm did something that in Islam we call Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. He enjoined what was right and he forbid what was bad. He forbade what was bad. He was not afraid to speak out against injustices. He was the most outspoken person about what was going on, the atrocities that were meted out against the black Americans in this country. Malcolm X ended up becoming a martyr. Why did he become a martyr? Many people will say because he spoke out against Elijah Muhammad. I don't agree. I'll give you my theory. You give me time, I'll give you my theory. Malcolm X understood that America had a problem. America had a sickness. This sickness was racism. This sickness made people write songs called That Strange Fruit. Why was the song Strange Fruit written? Because when a certain singer was driving through the South, she saw men that were just lynched, hanging from trees. What made them do that? This problem called racism. Racism, this disease, let men think that it was okay to get trained attack dogs and to attack innocent people and to put water hoses on them. What did it? This disease of racism. This disease of racism made white men go to a church in Selma, Alabama. They went to this church, they planted this bomb, and they killed 4 innocent black children. What did it? Racism. What was the cure for racism in this country? My brother Malcolm found the cure. How did he find the cure? Malcolm X went to Mecca. And when Malcolm X went to Mecca, he saw something he never saw in his whole entire life. He saw people from every corner of the globe coming to one place, wearing one type of dress, chanting the same slogan, "Here I am, Lord, here I am. I'm here." He saw all these men worship one God together. And at night, when it was time for them to go to sleep, he slept side by side with white men with blue eyes and blonde hair. Malcolm X was the man who said the white man is the devil. It's on tape. It's there. He said that he hated these people for what they did to our people. But when Malcolm sat there and he ate from the same bowl and drank from the same cup as people that would consider him his enemy in America, he said, if America wants to rid itself of this disease called racism, the only solution for America is Islam. But when Malcolm came back with that message, he came back with something that was truly terrifying. Malcolm X was able to reach only a certain group of people in America because of the message that he was preaching. Because the people looked at it as hateful. But when he went to Mecca and he said that all men come from the same creator, and he began to invite people from all nations, of all colors, people said this is dangerous. And our brother Malcolm was assassinated. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We all belong to God, and to God we all must return. This is the legacy of Malcolm X. But when Malcolm died in 1964, were people that chose their faith to be Islam, were they called terrorists, or were they associated with terrorism? No. The last man that I want to talk about is a man by the name of Wallace Dean Muhammad, or Warith Dean Muhammad. Warith Dean Muhammad was the son of Elijah Muhammad. And Warith Dean Muhammad was very innovative. Warith Dean Muhammad took Islam from the back corners, from just being a black religion, and brought it into the forefront of America. This man, Warith Dean Muhammad, is responsible for the largest conversion of Islam in the whole century, last century. These people began and accepted Islam properly. They no longer held on to the false statements that were made by his father. But his father said that my son will take you to places that I can't take you now. What did Warith Dean Muhammad do? He was the first to give an invocation in the United States Senate. He was the first Muslim to do that. That was in 1992. On March 3rd, he became the first Muslim to deliver an address on the Georgia State Legislative floor. In 1993, he was the first person to give the inaugural prayer for the interfaith prayer service that was given by Bill Clinton. In 97, he became the second person. He's the same person. What was it that Warith Dean Muhammad was trying to do here in America? He was trying to introduce Islam to America, and he was one of the people who advocated interfaith dialogue. He would go out and he would organize meetings. How many of you guys ever heard of the Crystal Cathedral with Robert Schuller? No church watchers in the mornings? Okay, no problem. Robert Schuller is one of the biggest, if you Google him, you'll see it, Robert Schuller was one of the biggest evangelists during the late 70s, early 80s, and into the 90s. His Crystal Cathedral sat 25,000 people at that time. Because of the influence of this man, these people began to work together and do interfaith conferences together, that many people began to get a better understanding of what Islam was. We lost this man just a few years ago. We lost a giant. It'll take 15 to 20 years to understand what this man was trying to do. But he was alive. It was on his watch that 9/11 happened. But this man, having the credentials that he had, why wasn't America turning to him to ask him about what happened with Islam and Americans? When at that time there began to be a separation of what was a Muslim and what people considered a Muslim. Now I'm looking at most of you guys, and I would think that the majority of the people in here are under 25 years old. And I did say the majority. Now when I was growing up, and for those of you who really know something, when you thought of Muslims, what did you think about? Bow ties and bean pies. That's what most people thought of, that was a Muslim. But we find that in America, and I'm going to have to backtrack and I'm going to have to do a little going back and revamping history. Not changing what I said before, but just to give you another scope of what's going on here. What we find is that in the 1960s, America had loosened up its immigration laws. So in the 1960s, you find an influx of Muslims moving into America. These people that moved into America were from Asia, the Middle East, Africa. And when they came to this country, why did they come to this country? To escape religious persecution, better education, a better way of life, the American dream. Every immigrant that came to this country, from the time this country was established, they came to this country seeking the same exact thing. The Muslims were no different. And when they came to this country, they became doctors, they became lawyers, they became professional businessmen. Some of them even became cab drivers. But they worked honest jobs. When they came here in the 60s, what Muslims looked at as being terrorists. No. But when terrorism began to wag its ugly head, what do we find? I'm going to give you a few events and I'm going to move pretty fast because I know we don't have too much time here. In the 1970s, when I was born, I'm a 70s baby, the first president I remember was Jimmy Carter. When I was in the first grade, I asked my mother, why are they always talking about this man? My mama said, because he's the president. What's that? He rules the country. Okay, no problem. But in the 70s, we knew that there was a conflict between Egypt and Israel. Anwar Sadat, I will never forget that name. They were going to Camp David. I thought Camp David was a place where you had tents and stuff like that. I didn't realize what it was. But I knew about Camp David and I knew about these negotiations that were supposed to be taking place between the Jews and the Egyptians. Now, in America, did the Americans, when the Egyptians and the Jews had that conflict, did the Americans look at the Egyptians and Muslims as being terrorists? No. They condemned Anwar Sadat and the Egyptians, and that was it. A few years later, 1979, a country called Iran, they had a revolution. The leader of that revolution was a man by the name of Ayatollah Khomeini. What was his slogan? Neither east nor west. He said, I don't want the capitalism of the west, nor do I want the communism of the east. But during this time, we found that Americans had people there, and they got caught up in a hostage situation. Now, when these people were caught up in that hostage situation, did Americans say that Muslims were terrorists at that time? No. Who did they condemn? Ayatollah Khomeini. He was the beginning of the axis of evil. But the Muslims and Islam were still in good standing. How do we know that? Because America called on another Islamic country, Iraq, to go to their aid to fight against Iran so that they could protect their interests that they lost in Iran when Khomeini came and took over. During the same time, Russia was trying to expand communism. How did they do that? They invaded Afghanistan. But America and her allies, they came and they trained those people in Afghanistan and showed them how to fight against the Russians. And the chief person that they trained over there, his name was Osama bin Laden. It's relative. But when America went and helped the Afghanis and the Afghanis pushed the Russians back into Russia, what did the Americans do with the promises that they promised Afghanistan? They reneged on. But as far as Americans were concerned, did we look at the Muslims as being terrorists? No. 1990, 91, the first Gulf War. America went to war with who? Saddam Hussein. But Saddam Hussein was the same person that America had just given all these weapons to and this money to fight against who? Iran. But even after the first Gulf War, did the Muslims become terrorists? After that war, something happened here in America. Any New Yorkers in here? In New York in 1993, there was the first accident with the World Trade Center. Now, how many of you guys went and actually read the transcripts of that court? I'm not going to tell you what happened, but they don't teach you about that either. I have to say it. I have to say it. I owe it to me and I owe it to you. The man that they said went and planted the bombs, he had a video recorded that said, yes, the FBI gave me these bombs. They told me to go up here and blow up this building. They said it was supposed to be something marked. Don't trust me. The internet is there. We live in the days of information. But even after that attack, well, Muslims looked at as terrorists. We were beginning to be looked at as terrorists. But what happened right after then? Osama bin Laden, he began to do these acts of jihad. Before then, how many people have ever heard the term jihad before in their life? Islamic jihad. Instead of referring to Islam as Islam, how did they try to ease it over? They said fundamentalist jihadist Muslims. Who was the leader of that fundamentalist movement? Osama bin Laden. So you had a few of these embassies that were bombed. And Osama bin Laden, he took credit for it. They had a warship that was bombed. Osama bin Laden, he took credit for it. Now what's amazing to me is that when the World Trade Centers went down, he never took credit for it. That's neither here nor there. But when we looked at terror, and they looked at Islam and terrorism, what was the face that was associated with Islam and terror? It wasn't my black American face. It wasn't the white American's face. It was the face of a Middle Easterner. So they began to say that there's some type of different Islam, there's something different to make you do what? To make you go back on something that you said, you know what? These people, we lived with them our whole lives. We didn't have a problem with these people at no time. What we want you to know as Americans is that on the day of 9/11, on the day after 9/11, in the weeks after 9/11, the things that they don't tell you about, the things that they don't show you on the newspaper, was that Muslims went out of their houses and went to their neighbors. They organized marches. They organized events to tell the people that, number one, we condemn what happened on 9/11. That this has nothing to do with Islam. We want you to be in our graces. You had people who were immigrants, who came from India, who came from Pakistan, who came from the Middle East, who came from Afghanistan, who came from Iran. When the government, before there was a Homeland Security, began to go question these people, they went with these people willingly. Why? Because they said we have to be patriots. Many of these people that were never convicted of anything, you know where they are right now? They're still on Guantanamo Bay, and it's been 10 years. This is not just. It is not right. But we have been called terrorists. We have become synonymous with terrorism. Pardon me. When I was growing up, you know who the only terrorists were? some people living in Ireland, the IRA. That's who we thought was the terrorists. Why? Because the British had occupied their land. They wanted to tell them what they could believe and what it is that they could do. So those people who were freedom fighters, they went down into England and they were blowing up restaurants, trains, and all of these things. They were the terrorists, not the Muslims. What we want you to know here in America is that, number one, if you ask Muslims how it is that we identify with ourselves, you'll find that we are not monolithic. If each Muslim in here, if you was to ask each person in here, how does he identify himself as a Muslim, the first thing some will say, I'm a Muslim first, then I'm an American. Yeah, some people say I'm an American first, then I'm a Muslim. Some people say I'm a human being first, then I'm a Muslim, then I'm an American. All of these different combinations. But as a Muslim, how is it that I identify myself in the way that I would hope that every Muslim would identify themselves? First, I would identify myself as a Muslim. Why? Because Muslim simply means one who willfully submits his will to the will of God. This connects me with my Creator who created me. Next, I am a human being. Because as a human being, this connects me with the whole race of people living in this world. What affects one of us affects all of us. And thirdly, I would say to the people, identify with your country. Because it's not necessary that I'm an American. I can move to Germany. I can move to Britain. I can move to Africa. Now, would I can still consider myself an American? Of course, because I was born here. But if I'm able to vote, if I'm able to live there, if I support my family in these places, then I become British. I become a Frenchman. I become a German. All of these things. So where you're born at, or where you live at, is inconsequential. Identify yourself as a Muslim. What is it that we want to know? What is it that we want you to know? What is it that we want you to know about Muslims in Islam? First, we want you to know that the majority of the Muslims that are in this country were born here. From the 60s on, we was procreating right here in America. So our children are Americans. You can only be an immigrant once. The person who moved here from another place, they're the immigrant. But everybody else is born here, they're Americans. So what do we want you to know? We want you to know that we as Muslims, we are concerned about health care. And what's going to happen to SSI by the time it's time for us to retire. This is a Christian nation. I don't doubt that. But if we as Christians or a Christian nation, or we as believers in God, if we believe and we follow the teachings of Muhammad and Jesus and Moses and all the prophets that came before them, are we not our brother's keepers? When Jesus was asked what are the two greatest commandments, he said, Hear ye Israel, the Lord thy God is one. And the second one is like unto it, to love thy neighbor like yourself. If you love your neighbor like you love yourself, would you want anything bad to happen to your neighbor? The Quran and our Prophet Muhammad tells us, say ye not that you're believers until you want for your brother that in which you want for yourself. Would there be a healthcare problem if we live by these creeds? No. Starvation? No. But we decide to do something else. Because those people who don't want us to be believers, they're the real terrorists. And we have a fight against them. What else do we want them to know? We want you to know that we're concerned that we won't be able to afford to send our children to college. Many people don't have jobs. How are we going to afford education? Our problems are your problems. What do we want you to know? That we're concerned with this unemployment. Where's the new jobs going to come from? What else do we want you to know? We want you to know that we're afraid. Why are we afraid? Because there may be some ignorant person out there who says that I'm a Muslim. Or, in Michigan last year, some ignorant people who said that they were Christians, who had that militia that was planning a terrorist attack in Michigan, these people go out and kill people. What? No. We're afraid of that. We're afraid of people coming in to try to destroy this country from the outside and those people that's trying to destroy the country from the inside. We fear that. Our fear is your fear. We see that America should know that here in this country, that this country has more prisoners in its criminal system than any other country on the face of this earth. We have more prisoners than the whole country of Russia. Who has more people, Russia or America? Why is it that we have more? Not statistically, we have more sheer numbers in jail than the Russians do. Our baby girls are coming home pregnant without having fathers for their babies. They have fathers, but they ain't married. So that means what? That more people are getting locked up, they're getting their license taken away. Why? Because here in this country, we should be terrorized. Why? Because they're taking away our moral system. That should scare us to death. It scares me as a parent. What else do we want you to know? We want you to know that America sends her brand out everywhere. And Americans believe that their way of life is the best way of life. So what do? They propagate it. As a Muslim, I believe that my way of life is the best way of life. As a Muslim, I am going to propagate my way of life. How do I propagate my way of life? My Lord tells me in the Quran, and invite all to the path of your Lord. How? With guns, with knives, with bombs, with beautiful preaching. I hope this type of preaching is beautiful to you. But he's telling us to use words. He says, "Oh, people of the book, let's come together and make an agreement between us and you." What is that agreement? That we worship none but God. We can't agree to that? In closing, what else is it that we as Muslims want you to know, or what Americans should know about Islam? You should know that you guys are our neighbors. And many of you don't understand how important the role of neighbors are in Islam. Our Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said that the angel Jibril had, when he was giving him the rights of the neighbor over the people, that our Prophet said that he thought that the neighbor would be one of those people who inherited from us. But what are the rights of the neighbor in Islam? Our Prophet told us, first, let me read the verse of the Quran, which is very beautiful. Allah says, "And serve Allah, serve God only, and do not associate anything with Him. And be good to your parents." Any Christians? What is the first commandment with promise?
The first commandment?
First commandment with promise. The first commandment that has a promise attached to it. If you honor them, then your days will be long. Look, God says the commandments, the first 4 commandments is about what?
God.
God. Your responsibility to God. The first 3 tells you about God. The 4th one tells you about the Sabbath day, the day of worship. The 5th goes where? Your responsibility to your parents. Right? Allah tells us in the Quran, obey God and don't associate anything with Him. Is that not the first 3 commandments? Love your God, He's one, He's alone. Do not make engraven images. Then He says to do good to your parents. This is what God is telling us. Do good to your parents. Then He says, and to your near kin. Those people that are in your family. And the orphan. Those people who don't have parents. And then the needy. Those people who have fallen on bad times. And then your neighbor, the one who is near, right there. And then the one who's far, the one that you've never seen before.
The stranger.
The stranger. The wayfarer. Now the rest of the commandments tells us to deal with this same thing. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. What? Is this not telling you to the way that you're supposed to act with your kinfolk? With the needy? With the wayfarer? And all of these things? Look, it's the same thing. Why? Because it's the same author. We could debate that later. But it also says for the neighbors. Our Prophet said to the neighbor, understand this. Now many of us as Muslims have not lived up to what it is our Prophet has told us to do, and we'll pay for that. But our Prophet said, if your neighbor asks you for help, help him. If he wants to borrow something from you, you should lend it to him. If he wants to donate something, if he wants you to donate something to him, you should do so. If he invites you, you should accept his invitation. If he gets sick, you should go and visit him. If he passes away, you should go to his funeral procession. If tragedy befalls him, you should feel sorry for him. We live here. We are your neighbors. This is our responsibilities towards you. And many of us are trying to live up to what it is that Allah and His Prophet has given to us to do it the way to treat you. Our Prophet said that only a few people are blessed by God's honor and mercy to honor their neighbors. How do we know this? Again, I was born in the 70s. In the 70s, I knew every one of my neighbors. And my neighbors knew me. Sometimes I wish I didn't know those neighbors. You know why? Because when my mother would leave, as soon as she came back, Pat, I saw your boys. I know they weren't supposed to be outside. And they was outside. And they had people in your house. And I was born as a Christian. I was born into a Christian family. My mother's a preacher. And my mother knows the Bible. And there's a verse there that says, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. My mother wasn't having any spoiled children. So you understand that the rod was always in action. I hated my neighbors for that when I was a kid. But right now today, I wish and pray that I had neighbors like those. Because our neighbors looked out for us and we looked out for them. Finally, we are told that if a person hurts his neighbor, that he is a curse from God. And most importantly, our Prophet said that any person that says that he's a believer in Islam and he goes to bed with his belly full and his neighbor is hungry, that he is not of him, that they are not believers. It is our jobs, it is our duty, it is our responsibility to let all of you know as Americans that we as Muslims, you are our neighbors. That your fears are our fears. We as Muslims, we're mayors of cities now. We're on the police force. We're working in your hospitals. We're in the Senate. We're in Congress. We're at these places not because we want to do anything bad to America, but because we believe in America. As Muslims, the immigrant brothers, they could have gone anywhere. They decided to come here for the opportunities that are here. For those of us who are indigenous to this country, many of us can't afford to move, but if we could, we might stay anyway. Why? Because in America we are afforded certain rights. There are things that we can do here in this country that we can't do in Islamic nations. What we want you to know is that we're not terrorists. We don't believe in terrorist acts. We are tired of going to the airport and having to get checked. I travel a lot. But you know what's really ironic? It's not the women that's wearing hijab that's getting checked. It's not the man that looks like a Middle Easterner that's getting checked. It's those people who look like regular Americans that are getting checked. I want you to know that you guys as my neighbors, for those of you that are Christians, as a Muslim, if I see someone trying to destroy your church, as a Muslim, you know what I have to do? I have to go and I have to stand in front of that church. Even if it costs me my life, I got to protect that place. Why? Because Allah says to the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran, He says, I know that you don't like fighting. But if you do not fight, the churches, the synagogues, they will be destroyed. There will not be any places where the name of God is being worshipped. This was the responsibility of our Prophet. And we followed the Sunnah, his life. So if this is good for him, it's good for us. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and putting up with all of my rambling. I hope I didn't offend anyone. If I did, I do apologize. Anything that you heard here today that was good, it was from God Almighty. Any mistakes, they were mine. Thank you very much. And I think that they had papers for those who didn't want to stand up and ask a question. You could write a question down and bring it up, or if you have a question, please shoot away. Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming and giving a beautiful lecture. I have a question. We have in the media a lot of they start calling Muslims as terrorists, and they start labeling us like Islamists, like insulting word. And what do you think? From where they start having those labels, and why they start labeling as Islam? And what's your view how we can eliminate these labels?
I spoke about a brother earlier by the name of Malcolm X. Malcolm X said something very beautiful. He said, "Only a fool allows his enemy to label him, and he wears it." So if somebody who doesn't have our best interest as Muslims, if they call us Islamists, then if we decide to wear it, if we decide not to go out and speak out against it, whose fault is it? It's ours. What is it that our Prophet tells us about if we see something wrong? When we see an injustice. He says there are three things that we can do against injustice. First, we can remove it physically. Second, we can speak out against it. Third, we can hate it in our hearts. And if we only hate it in our hearts, that's so cowardly. But if we don't feel no type of way about it at all, then we have no character. So, we live in the days of information. How much does it cost to start a blog? Nothing. How much does it cost to go on somebody else's blog that's saying things that are wrong? Nothing. Nothing but your time. As Muslims, we have to use the tools that we have to tell people what it is that we believe. Because right now, the biggest people that is propagating Islam in the wrong way is the media. But as Muslims, we aren't doing anything for the most part to go out and combat that. There are many Muslims here in this country that have money. Across the board. Why don't we have our own Islamic news station here in America? Al Jazeera isn't based here, but couldn't we come up with a program like Al Jazeera here, to where we could put our voices out there? We have to start thinking, what are the best ways for us to give the information of Islam to the people? We live in mass media, and if the only thing that people are getting from the media are the negative things, then again, we're the only ones to blame. I hope that answers your question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think a lot of the misperceptions of Muslims, particularly those from the Middle East, is more cultural than religious?
I think it has to be. I don't think that it's cultural nor religious. It's cultural on the American point of view. And let me tell you why I say that it's cultural on the American point of view. I say that it's cultural on the American point of view because they're building our culture against the Middle Easterns.
But I'm talking about like the father who's accused of an honor killing of his daughter.
Oh,
that's not Islam. That's cultural.
Right. And the thing that's really difficult about a situation like that is that all of those things, like honor killings and, before Islam, people were doing honor killings.
Can you explain what that is?
Okay, an honor killing, as they say it today, especially when it applies to the female, to the woman, is when a woman goes out and she has an illicit relationship with someone, and the parent or a brother or a relative goes and they kill this daughter for doing that. How many people think that that's wrong? I agree. Now, how many Christians do we have in here? What does the Bible say that you're supposed to do with the adulterer and the fornicator?
Forgive them.
No. Go back to the, thank you. You stone them to death.
Which testament, Old or New?
I'm going to ask a question, and I don't mean to sound facetious or anything like that. There's this conception that there's a New Testament and an Old Testament. In the Revelation, when God had given the words to Moses, to Jesus, and to the other prophets, where did God say that I'm giving you a New Testament and this is Old Testament? Jesus Christ said, think ye not that I've come to destroy
The law, but I have come to fulfill it.
the law, nor
Prophets.
the prophets.
But not one jot or tittle shall pass away until all has been fulfilled.
Absolutely. So, when you see this, Jesus confirms the law.
But he sent the adulterous woman away and said, sin no more.
He asked the question, which is very important. When the position of adultery came about, he asked all of those that were ready to pick up those stones to stone her. He said, any of you, which amongst you are without sin, then you stone her. So, if these people that were there, that were supposed to live the way that they wanted to live, they would have stoned them. But they had their own things to deal with. What happens in religion is that most people understand the letter of the law, but they don't understand the spirit of the law. And those people didn't understand the spirit of the law, and they thought that God was a merciless God, but God is full of mercy. So with these honor killings, we sit back and we get offended by it. We truly get offended by it. But what do scientists tell us today? That those countries where they have open prostitution, that these countries within 50 to 60 years, what happened to them? They collapse.
The most recent, I won't pursue the subject, but I think it is a cult.
It is cultural. You're right. I agree with you 100% that it is cultural that thank you very much. It is cultural that these people begin, like when I first became a Muslim way back when, you know, my aunts, they said, oh, now you're going to have your wife walk 3 steps behind you?
Yeah.
You know, this was something that they said that was part of Islam. I've read all types of books. I've never seen that in any of the Islamic books. I've read classical books and I've read modern books, and this is not a part of Islam. So, but did certain countries, did they make their women, did they subject their women to that? Of course they did. That was cultural. So what we have to do is we have to understand that there is a separation between that which is Islam and that which is cultural, and the only way that you're going to know the difference is to become friends with a Muslim, not any Muslim, but a knowledgeable Muslim. Because some Muslims are like some Christians. Let's be real about it. There's some Christians that are only Christian in name. That's it. They have no other attachment to their faith. So you get with a Muslim that's knowledgeable and let him guide you into good books, good situations, so that you'll learn what is right and what is wrong. Then you can eliminate the culture. Wow. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth real quick. I'm going to answer here and then there. I'm going to answer here and then I'm going to open the doors for you guys. Okay. It says, what is jihad? Is it true that martyrs get 70 virgins? How come terrorists kill innocent people? Okay, 70 virgins in instant heaven. How come terrorists kill innocent people? Now, 70 virgins, meaning 70 female virgins? See, most people, you know, when people say that term, you know, the first thing they think about, a jihadist is male or female.
Male. That's what they used to think.
Right. So when the female jihadist, when she goes out, what happens to her?
She gets to be one of the virgins.
Wow. What happens is that number one, our Prophet Muhammad, he has given us an acid test. What is this acid test? He says, anything that you hear from here, or that is reported from saying from me, from here, verify it with what? The Quran. If it goes against the Quran, toss it. In heaven, what would be the purpose of having 70 virgins? There is none. There is none. Enemies of Islam have come in and they said, oh, this is why they want to do this, that, and the other. The Quran says something very beautiful. The Quran says, do not say of those who are slain or die in the way of Allah that they are dead. For they are not dead, even though you cannot perceive it. For they are receiving sustenance with their Lord. What is the condition of dying in the way of your Lord? I'm not going to draw this out. I'm going to make it real simple. The Quran says, if you save one innocent person, it's as if you saved the whole of humanity. If you kill one innocent person, it's as if you killed the whole of humanity. So, if you're murdered, now let me give you an example. In Islam, suicide is considered what? Self-murder. I don't care what nobody says, there's nothing in the Quran, there's nothing in the Hadith of the Prophet that tells a person to go out and take their own life. This is incorrect. This is suicide, and there's nothing positive about suicide. Everything about it is negative. So for that person that puts on a bomb and go blow up themselves, he has just stamped his first class ticket to the hellfire. Not heaven, but to the hellfire. And terrorists kill innocent people because they never understood Islam. And I say that these people were not Muslims. As far as jihad is concerned, the term jihad means struggle. It comes from the root word jahada, which means to pull and push against, to struggle against.
What you do in your everyday life.
The Prophet Muhammad had just come in from a war. And he said to one of his companions, he said, you have just left the lesser jihad. He said, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet of God, but we just left war. He says, yes, this is the lesser jihad. Now you begin the greater jihad, which is what? The struggle that you have with yourself. For us as Muslims, we know, sometimes, you know, when Fajr comes in, at 5:10, 5:15 in the morning, for you to get up at 5:10, 5:15 in the morning, that's a struggle. Right now the holy month of Ramadan is in the summer. And we're fasting from like 5 in the morning to like 9 o'clock at night. That's a struggle. You can't hide from yourself. Every time you try to do something that's right, you have your own lower desires, and you have that enemy who I told you that was rejected. Why? Because he disobeyed God. The Quran is very beautiful about that enemy too. The Quran does something that no other book does. What does it do? God tells you that this one here, this Satan, he is your open and avowed enemy. He's not playing, he's not hiding the fact that he's your enemy. He's open about it and he's avowed to it. What does Satan say when he was getting thrown out of the garden? And we say garden only as a placebo word that everybody can deal with. He says, if you, this is Satan talking to God, if you give me respite, if you give me time, I will show you that you made a mistake. Because you will find most of them, the human beings, that you favored over me, to be people